Hi there. In order to get the attention of a listener when you're using your camera, your webcam, like I am now, you need two things. They're both really two sides of the same coin. And that is, you need to have something important to say, or not necessarily important, but certainly something that the listener wants to listen to. So that's the content. The other requirement is the delivery. Delivery is every bit as important as the content. And if you have both together, then you will come across in an interesting way to your listener or listeners. Probably one of the best ways to almost ensure that you'll get the attention of your listeners is to present your information in a story. Or you could be simply an entertaining speaker who likes to present to audiences and tell them stories. That's something I've been doing for a long, long time now. But in order to get that delivery, there are things that you can do to help yourself. One of the things that I can recall reading about many years ago in a book written by a New Zealand politician who happened to be a very, very good platform speaker. And his advice was reading aloud out of a book as if you were trying to convey what was in that book, the information, the story, to a listener or listeners, using all the right pauses, voice variation, inflections, and so forth. And this is something that you can do for yourself privately at home. Get yourself a book, not non-fiction. I would say fiction would be better, short stories or even poetry, because these contain the sorts of words that you would be using if you were entertaining an audience with a story. If you are a business person, then by all means, read business books, or even books that are sort of semi-business, like the 7 Habits of Highly Successful People by Covey. I mean, that's a masterpiece, that book. Read that aloud. Read out the pieces as though you were instructing someone else from the book. Here's an example of a story that I've told many times, and this is done for entertainment. It's the story about the greatest sea story ever told, the maiden voyage of the RMS Titanic way back in 1912. I told this story to an audience of about, I think it was 164 people on the 100th anniversary of the sinking of the Titanic, to commemorate it. It was a big gathering, everybody dressed up in old-fashioned gear, and it was marvelous. But I started the story like this. It was cold that night, bitterly cold, and very still. There was no moon, and a million stars shone down upon the surface of an absolutely glass-still sea, reflecting in the inky darkness. And on the surface of that sea was a great ocean liner, motionless, our 8 accommodation decks ablaze with light. Around about the ship, further out, you could hear the splash of oars being handled by inexperienced hands. And every now and again you'd hear the creak of the davits as the boats were being lowered into the surface of the water. But the strangest sound that night, given the situation, was the sound of ragtime music coming from the deck of the ship. Understand what I'm doing here? You create the atmosphere with the words you use. Words that people can visualize. That's the way to do it. If you want to become good at delivery, as I've said, probably one of the best things that you can do for yourself is to get a book of poems and read the poems. Or you can use poems that you can remember from your childhood. It doesn't matter what the stories are, what the poems are. What you need to do is do this in front of the video or the webcam yourself. Play it back. Evaluate yourself. Be a little bit severe on yourself. I can do better than that. And play it again. Say the same poem again. This is really important because, after all, why would you want to be speaking into a camera anyway, unless it's a social gathering with friends? If it's something to do with wanting to influence people, persuade them, get them around to your way of thinking about things, you need to be able to do it in such a way that not only does it interest them, but also that it creates in them a feeling. Because people decide what they're going to do from how they feel about it. All the information in the world, all the pie charts, all the statistics won't move a listener as much as one story about one person that pulls at their heartstrings. You see this in charitable organisations. Someone will say, oh, there's this terrible famine going on in such and such a country. Will you mind contributing? Well, it's too abstract. But if you're told about one story about one little child, say 3 or 4 years of age, and the mother and how they've gone through all these various troubles, and that story about that little kid plucks at your heartstrings, then you're more likely to donate or subscribe regularly to that organisation. So being able to move people emotionally is very important. And the best way to move them is a personal story, something out of your own life, which they can identify with. Once you and they are identifying with one another, you're on a winner.